video, I'm going to go over Chapter 10 of the Cengage 4th edition, Intro to Marine Biology. This chapter covers marine fish, and I think it's a pretty interesting chapter. So these are some of the key concepts that we'll be going over, but just for time, I'm going to just show them here, and then you can circle back later if you need to and make notes. Okay, so fish and vertebrates all have a backbone. Primitive fish actually had no paired fins, and they did not have jaws. That made it very difficult to eat. And so future iterations ended up having paired fins and jaws. These fins helped them to swim more efficiently, and it helped them to get food and get away from predators. I have a little gif here of this ray. Manta rays, interestingly, are one of the only animals, maybe the only animal that I know of that has 3 pairs of appendages, which makes it pretty cool. Okay, so there's this cool video by Mothlight Media that explains the evolution of the jawbone. So if you're interested, I think they do a good job of explaining that. So these primitive fish, jawless fish like hagfish and lampreys, both lacked jaws and paired appendages. They have skeletons of cartilage. They lacked scales. Hagfish also lack vertebrae. Hagfish are really gross to me, but maybe not to you. I don't judge. But anyways, they actually excrete a slime, and they excrete that slime on themselves for protection, but even they excrete it on the food they eat to keep other animals away. So it's pretty gross. Here's a video from EV Nautilus of them seeing a hagfish just kind of rolling around in the deep and tying itself in knots. Somebody was actually carrying a bunch of these in a car that got into a crash. So here's a video there. All of the hagfish excreted all of their nasty slime all at once when the crash occurred. So it was a very disgusting cleanup. Okay, so lampreys. Lampreys actually use suckers to suck and hold onto their prey. They end up leaving these bite-sized holes in them. They eat off their prey for a couple of days and then they let them go, but the fish could still get an infection or a disease, not to mention that's pretty uncomfortable. For reproduction, typically they're andromous, which means they swim up rivers to spawn. They go from saltwater to fresh in order to spawn, and then their larvae will actually stay generally filter feeding for a few years before they totally go through a metamorphosis and return back to the ocean. Okay, cartilaginous fish are fish that have cartilage, but cool, super cool. They have these placoid scales. Now, your book says placoid scales. The large majority of people that I've ever met call these dermal denticles. And so I think these two names are actually synonymous. There's a video by Amaze Labs where you can look at what this is more closely. But pretty much the teeth inside of sharks basically extend upwards out of their mouth and over their entire body. And so when you ever pet a shark, you want to touch from head to fin, because if you go backwards, all of these little dermal denticles like fish teeth, again in the book, placoid scales, they will cut you up in the other direction. Okay. So cartilaginous fish, they do have also this fin called a heterocircle fin, and I want to highlight that here. It also mentions placoid scales here, but we just talked about this. But the heterocircle fin actually means that the fin is larger on top than on the bottom. This is an animal that can move very quickly and can go long distances with a tail like that. Sharks tend to be top predators, excellent swimmers. The males actually have claspers, which are 2 penises, not 1, but 2 penises for mating. They often have a ventral mouth and lots of rows of teeth. They're found in all oceans, and humans exploit sharks in huge numbers. for all kinds of reasons. I highly, highly recommend this Mark Rober video that demonstrates that sharks really, really are not interested in human blood. People have a lot of misconceptions about sharks in general. Here is a video from Blue World TV. Here's the male with not one, but two penises called Claspers. And this is a quick, fun video to quiz yourself if you can tell a male versus a female shark. Okay, so rays and skates. So rays are actually so adorable to me. I think they're super cute. They often live on the bottom. That's why they're in the sand. That's why they're a danger for people to step on them. Because a lot of times they're scooping things out of the sand, like snails or small fish that they are eating on the bottom. And on top of their head, they have eyes and spiracles. And then their gill slits are down here on the ventral side, meaning the underneath side, for them to also breed. There's electric rays, and they have electric organs in their bodies that can deliver up to 220 volts. That's both to escape predators and to stun their prey. Stingrays also have these venomous barbs. The venom it's congregated usually near the base of the barb, and when you get stung, that venom gets into you. It can cause extreme problems like tissue death, but in most cases, it's just exceptionally uncomfortable, and you have to walk in from the shore. So that's why you do the shuffle step when you're out in the water. I have gotten one of these in my foot, and it is uncomfortable to say the least. So sawfish actually have a long saw-like nose or bone that comes out of the front, and this has a series of barbs on it to cut up anything that's trying to take its food or is a threat to them. So the difference between rays and skates. Rays will swim, and think of like them swimming with their fins out, like a flapping bird motion, whereas skates more have this like undulation from front to back, where it's like a wave-like motion from the front to back. Rays have tails with that are streamlined, venomous barbs. They can be larger, and they're ovoviviparous, meaning they have eggs, but those hatch inside of mom before they're born. Whereas skates, they have fleshier tails, no spines. They're usually smaller, but that's not always the case. We have some big ones in Southern California, and they're mostly oviparous, meaning they lay their eggs outside of mom and then they hatch. Okay, this is an interesting group that you don't see much called the chimeras, ratfish, rabbitfish, and spookfish. Here's a cool video from deep marine scenes on these guys. They do have an operculum, which is a gill cover. They don't have a cloaca. So in many fish, you have a common opening or hole that's used for both mating and for waste, but chimeras have two separate openings for this, and males do have the claspers like we learned on sharks. So jawed fish, there's two sets of jawed fish, the cartilaginous ones that are made of cartilage, and bony fish, which are also made of cartilage, but as they get older, that is turned into bone, and there's some of those listed there. Okay, on fish anatomy, I wanted to point out that fish have this extra organ called a swim bladder that can be inflated or deflated to hold air to get the fish to go up or down, and the fish can maintain what's called, like divers call it, neutral buoyancy, where like if you're a scuba diver, you know you should be able to go down to any depth and be able to hold steady and not jump up or down. And fish do this naturally with their swim bladder. They also have a liver at the bottom that is usually very oily and fatty, and a lot of animals like to eat that out, especially on something like a shark. They're hunted a lot of times by orcas that will often just bite out the really oily, fatty liver and leave the rest of the shark to die. They just wanted the liver. Okay, so ray fin fish and lobefin fish are different from each other. So the ray fin fish, this category means that their fins have a ray, like a line of bones that hold on their fin, whereas lobed fin has this big lobe that comes out and holds their fin. Ray fin fish are like tuna, cod, and they have a gas-filled swim bladder, like we just talked about, to adjust their buoyancy. Whereas lobefin fish, they can be like coelacanths or lungfish, but they have lung sacs, like they have gills and lung sacs to regulate buoyancy. So lobefin fish live in the Indian Ocean. There are only 2 extant species, and remember that extant does not mean extinct, it just means that there's 2 living sets. Somebody found one in a fisherman's catch in 1938 before they thought it was extinct. Here's a video you can watch for more information. But they live super deep in the ocean and because it's so deep and so dark, they have what's called a rostral organ, which is their nose surrounded by fat, and it can actually detect electricity. So when it detects a pulse, it knows when to strike at its prey. They can live up to 60 years, and they're considered highly endangered. Okay, so ray fin fish come in have different kinds of scales. This first one is called the ganoid scales. They're very heavy and very clunky. So you've got to have a good a lot of primitive fish have this, and then a lot of other ones evolved past this point. Okay, so think of like the sturgeons. And then there's 2 more advanced kind of scales that are lighter weight but still do the job, called cycloid or ctenoid scales that I think look like barnacles. But this video here, called Wandering Fish Scales and Skin in Fish, explains more about that. So there's different fins on a fish. Some of them are paired, like these pelvic fins, one on the left, one on the right. Or this pectoral fin, one on the left, one on the right. But there's some fins that are unpaired, like this first dorsal fin, or this second dorsal fin, or this anal fin. And so fish always have some kind of grouping of those paired or unpaired fins. There's also different body shapes of fish, and we're going to go over those. When you look at something like this marlin right here, you're like, how does it look like this, oval right here? It doesn't look like an oval at all. Okay, the oval is trying to get you to think about what it would look like, the general shape, if it was totally dark coming towards you, and this marlin was swimming toward you, it would be a kind of oval shape and then with a fin. Or this butterfly fish would be kind of really like a squished oval swimming towards you. Or this flounder that lives on the bottom would look like a sideways mustache. So there is a whole TED Ed about why fish are fish shaped. So I recommend you watch that a little bit more so you can see the advantages of each. We're going to talk about a few of them. So marlin actually have a body that's called fusiform. This is a super fast, strong swimmer. These guys are meant for crossing oceans, and they're shaped like a torpedo, called fusiform. Reef fish, like this butterfly fish, are what's called laterally compressed, meaning it looks like when they look at you head on, they're like really big from this side, then like uber skinny the other way. This is for darting in and out of corals and getting away from things. And you can basically navigate a very complex habitat with a body like that, but you're not going to go very far. In your entire life, these fish might live in like a 10-foot diameter area their entire lives. Like they could live in a small area because they're not meant to go very far. A flounder, or like I see sanddabs or halibut, and a lot in Southern California, these are bottom dwellers. And they are compressed, when they're first born, they go and lay down in the sand. And when they do that, their eyeball is in the sand. So one of their eyeballs actually migrates up from the other side. It actually takes a field trip and it lands on the upside so it can have 2 eyeballs. It's kind of crazy. And then this fin gets overly small and it just lays in the sand. Like that's how it hides and gets its food. It's so weird. Okay. An anglerfish, these guys are not fast at all. And that's why they have a lure to bring other fish towards them. Their body shape like this, if they were looking at you, are called a globular body. An eel is actually like kind of circular. If you see it, they can fit into very good hidey holes or tight crevasses. When you are looking at them from their hidey holes, they often look very threatening because they're always opening their mouths like they're showing teeth and growling or snarling. But this is actually how they breathe. They're bringing in water and passing it over their lungs. This is them breathing. And if they didn't do this, then they would actually die. So that is why they are doing that. Okay. So there's two different types of coloration that you need to know. One is called chromatophores. I really recommend you watch this. This is a video by the BBC called Cuttlefish Camouflage in a Living Room. This cuttlefish tries to blend in with this checkerboard floor and like a floral couch they have. It's crazy. Fish like this have chromatophores, which are very freeform, irregular shaped cells. They have pigments in the center, and then they can push the pigments to where they need to go to look like the shape that they need. It's really cool. Then there's iridophores, which are colorless, but they'll kind of reflect silver to hide the fish. There's another video here from National Geographic, Camouflage. There's obliterative counter shading, and this is when counter shading is really simple. It's the majority of fish have darker on the top, lighter on the bottom, so that when you are looking down into the water and it looks dark, the fish is also dark and it blends in. But when you're looking from underneath and the sun's behind it, it will actually look bright. So, and then some fish have what's called disruptive coloration, which we already talked about with the we can go back to it here, this butterfly fish. So having its like colors go in all different directions, or a black line over its actual eye and a big fake eye on its back, that is called like a disruptive coloration to fool prey. Other ways that you can be colored is poster colors. These blend in with like coral or bright habitats. Sometimes it's a warning, sometimes it's a sexual display. And then there's cryptic coloration, where it's like literally trying to, and very effectively here, hide like a sanddab in Southern California. So this is a National Geographic called World's Best Disguised Predator Fish. Check that out. Okay, locomotion. See this W right here on this fish? So this W is like muscles that will contract all on one side of the fish, starting at the head and moving to the tail, all on the right side. Then the left side will contract at the head and at the tail, all on the other side. And this is how fish move. There's some fish that move more like this, where their entire body is doing it. Some fish, it's more like the bottom half of them is doing that. So it just depends depending on the species. Okay, so a lot of fish have something, and this isn't unique to fish, birds do this too, but have something called countercurrent exchange. And countercurrent exchange specifically is this, and it applies in a few different places. Okay, so blood is coming out from the core of the fish and going out to the fins, and as it's coming out of the core, it doesn't have hardly any oxygen left, and it's got a ton of CO2, and it needs to get that out really fast. So as that blood goes past the gills, the outgoing like veins are wrapped all around the incoming veins, and they circulate past each other a few times. They actually loop past each other a few times. And what that does is it helps the CO2 from like the core go and diffuse out into the other veins, and then the oxygen to diffuse in. So it's these like two different things exchanging their gases naturally, so that the oxygenated blood then is heading back into the fish. fish don't just use that process, that countercurrent exchange. They don't just do that with gases that they exchange. They also use that same method for heat. So the blood that's coming out of the center of the shark is running past the blood vessels that are going back in, and the blood vessels coming in from the fin are ice cold. So they actually wrap really close to the blood that's going out to the fin, coming out from the core, and they pass by each other so that the blood coming from the core warms up that blood before it goes back in. So they do that a lot. For most fish, water has to move continuously past their gills to keep their blood oxygenated. So this applies catching a fish, and then you leave it in a bucket of water, but the bucket doesn't move past their gills all day. They're gonna die pretty quickly, mostly because of suffocation. They have to have that water constantly passing past their gills. Okay, so maintaining buoyancy, maintaining their same space without falling or floating to the top. Okay, so sharks basically will sink if they stop swimming. So a lot of times sharks, do fall to the bottom of the ocean when they are asleep. Sharks will have large livers that produce a fat called squalene. It's a very oily fat, and that fat is less heavy than water, so it'll help make the shark a little more buoyant, so they don't always just have to motor with their fins to keep themselves up. We already talked about the swim bladder, but here's a funny GIF that I found about the swim bladder. Notice the swim bladder this is the gas-filled sac that helps fish maintain buoyancy. It's always on the top part of the fish, because if you had a little balloon pulling you up, you would want it on the top side, not on the bottom that's going to flip you upside down. So fish will actually as gas compresses as they go down, they'll actually add from their own oxygen supply. They will add oxygen to it because it will get compressed so that they do stay buoyant. Okay, there's two methods for adjusting the amount of gas. They can gulp air, or they can use a gas gland from their blood. So very active swimmers don't have this because they're swimming all the time, but there are some bottom dwellers that don't have a swim bladder because they don't need it at all. So sharks and fish actually have sharks especially have a great olfactory receptors. That means they can smell really, really well and far away. That does not mean that you particularly smell good, but they can smell from really far away. And again, I recommend Mark Rober's video on that to learn a little bit more about that and to get a little more educated on that. So there is a lateral line in sharks. Ray fin fish also have a lateral line, but this is basically a canal that runs through the sharks, and they can literally detect vibrations and in the water. So I often tell people, if you want to sneak up on an ocean, like a shark, if you want to sneak up on them, don't move very, just be really calm, and that's how you can sneak up on them in the water. Which, by the way, every shark that has ever approached me in the water has just bolted away from me as soon as they're about 6 feet away. So here is a cool shark dissection done by the Smithsonian Channel, where they cut through that lateral line, and you can see the whole thing in case you're interested. So they do have a vision in fish. They have different eyelids, and they move their eye back and forth with a lens. A lot of times they have their eyes basically on both sides of their head like that, which gives them what's called monocular vision, that each eye is seeing something totally different. I can't even imagine processing that in your brain. Most fish see in black and white, but some near the surface can see in color. So when fish go and digest, They do have pyloric ceca, which is a digestive juice. They also have a spiral valve like inside their stomachs that increase the surface area for absorption. All cartilaginous fish are carnivores, but ray fin fish will basically eat just about anything. Their prey is generally swallowed whole, and that's usually done so that the prey doesn't block their gills. And then the filter feeders, like this whale shark, will have something called gill rakers. It actually looks like tiny little teeth rakes that will pull out all of the plankton. It's pretty interesting. So to keep themselves safe, fish will have camouflage. Some have spines. I totally recommend you watch this. Triggerfish from this is the Picasso parrotfish. I highly recommend you watch and see how a triggerfish works. You actually pull down one of their spines or fins, and spine will like pull the next one down. Fish can inflate their bodies like puffer fish. You have flying fish to escape predators through the air, but sometimes then they get picked off through the air. Here's a video from the BBC about that flying fish picked off from above and below. Parrotfish will actually make a mucus cocoon, which is disgusting. Clingfish will attach to rocks, and they attach so hard to rocks that predators give up trying to get them. And scorpionfish and stonefish are actually highly venomous. Don't step on one. But here are different, here's like a GIF of this guy's fish being swallowed whole. That's what they do. They just eat it whole. Here is a fish, and you can see it's got these highly adapted like mouth parts that are very straight for eating coral, like a corallivore. This is a larger fish eating what looks like a horn shark to me, but the horn shark has a really sharp spine, and I bet it gets spit out here. And here's an octo that gets spit out in this GIF. Okay, so the fun part, the reproduction in fish. So here's a little GIF of what you probably think a lot of fish breeding looks like, and for some it is, but some they do have very elaborate dances. So here is the Smithsonian Channel, the magical mating ritual of the mandarin fish. But when fish eventually give birth, they do it from oviparity. That's not the way I say it usually. So oviparous birth is laying the eggs outside of the mother. Then the ovoviviparous fish, they will actually have the egg inside of mom, hatches inside of mom, then comes out alive. So it's like the eggs and the live birth. And viviparous birth is a completely live birth, just like you would see in humans. So this, I will play this little video in the background, but you have some fish that are pelagic spawners. That means they're going to basically go out in the middle of the ocean, release eggs, sperm. They generally have no parental care in that situation. Then there's also benthic spawners. And you can have non-buoyant eggs, like these little mermaids types of purses that will have these like tongs almost that kind of hang on to seaweed and things, and you probably just saw this little ray hatch from there, and it's really cute. Okay, there's different ways, like brood hiders, like grunion. Here's a really cool video on grunion in Southern California. But basically, at high tide, the females and males will come up on land. The females will wiggle into the sand, lay her eggs. The male wraps himself around him, juicing his sperm all over her, and it like goes down and gets all over her eggs. Then they go back into the water, the male and the female. And then when the next high tide comes up, the babies are ready to hatch, and they go out with the next high tide. This happens regularly in the summertime in Southern California during the new moon and full moon. Then there's other fish like that guard their eggs, like blennies or gobies, and the guarding is usually done by the males. The female usually lays the egg and then the male guards. Then there's ones called bearers, where like in the jawfish, this is a jawfish, the female goes and lays her eggs in the male's mouth. And he just has to sit there. And he sits there with the eggs in his mouth for days to a few weeks. until they finally hatch. And if he has to eat, he'll spit the eggs out for a while, and then he'll eat, and he'll like semi gulp the eggs, and he'll just sit like that for a long time. And then of course you already know about seahorses from one of the previous videos. Okay, so a lot of fish, like there's a decent amount that are actually hermaphrodites. So some of them are synchronous, where they have male and female parts at both times. But some are like protogyny, which is females that turn into males, or protandry, which is changing from males to females. So I actually have a GIF here of sheep's head. Sheep's head, the way this happens, that the male or the female turns into a male, is in an area. This is a California sheep's head that you see very commonly. You'll have the female with this like pink orange coloration. And at a certain point, when there's not a male around, he's been eaten or the area territory's been expanded or whatever, there needs to be another male. The females will come together and have what I call a large mouth contest, where both of them will open their mouths, and whoever has the bigger, badder mouth will end up turning into a male. And her coloration very quickly changes from this to this. And she, and this is all done via hormone. She has a hormone change that changes her ovaries into testicles. And now she is the male in the area because she had the biggest mouth. Okay. So there's lots of larvae that are actually zooplankton. If that's a hard word for you, just remember that it's an animal plankton, but a plankton is just something that can't move on its own. It just kind of gets washed around in the ocean till it's bigger, or some things stay planktonic forever. So usually eggs have an egg sac at first, and then fish will grow for as long as they're alive. Fish never stop growing over time. This is a cool fish hatching video that's very short, called Chris Fix, Fish Hatching from Eggs Under the Microscope. So I suggest that so you can see what that looks like. It's pretty cool. So here's a Hakai video about why do fish school, and it goes into a lot of good reasons. Some fish will live solitary by themselves. Some will go into school. The school's like this. Everybody's doing the same exact thing at the same exact time. It's like synchronized swimming. Sometimes fish go into pods. This is usually for protection and defense, and they're very, very closely aggregated. And sometimes fish are in what's called a shoal, where they're nearby each other, but they're not all doing the same thing. And they'll usually take this level of organization when they want to breed or for like daytime protection or something, but they don't all need to look the same. So fish also migrate. So some migrate daily, like grunts. They move from the coral during the day to eat, and then the seagrass at night to hide from predators. You'll have seasonal migrations like tuna here that will go from really deep ocean waters to like closer to the shorelines, and hundreds of miles, if not further away, seasonally. And then some are what's called catadromous, moving from freshwater to seawater to breed, like the fish called mullets, which don't look nearly as awesome as what you would expect, or anadromous, which means they move from seawater to freshwater. And an example of that is this like type of salmon that move from seawater to freshwater. Very interesting migration though. Is and you probably already know about salmon, so very interesting, is like this eel, freshwater eel migration. So they live in Europe and in North America, in freshwaters, and they'll live there, the males 4 to 8 years, the females like 12 years. And then when they are sexually mature, they will actually swim 1 to 3 years, or I'm sorry, 2 months. 2 months to a year. 2 months to a year. It's a quicker swim from North America than Europe, but they will swim to the Sargasso Sea near Bermuda. They will swim down very, very, very deep into the ocean, and they will spawn there. And then from there, the adults they will die. So then their babies are actually called elvers. And the baby eels are called elvers. The elvers will actually swim all the way back up into the fresh waters, where they will stay for a long time till they are adults. Crazy, the swim back home to North America takes about a year, 3 years to get back to Europe. And that's where they will live till they're mature, just like their parents, and then come back. Okay, the salmon migration. This is anadromous. They migrate and swim up rivers. The Pacific ones die after they spawn. They'll often lay their eggs in what's called a red. They like fast moving, very clean, shallow water. Look at how nice that would be to have a little hatchery. And so they pick areas that are of a decent size. It's called a red before they hatch. It's very commonly thought that salmon are using odor to navigate upstream, but people really don't know if that odor is coming from the salmon themselves or from the area. And the last movie that I will recommend is the BBC Seahorse mating dance. It's pretty cool if you want to check it out. And that completes our chapter 10 marine fishes video. I hope you learned a lot in that one. Marine fish are awesome.